Welcome to Writing the Wrong Way. This is a podcast for serious writers who want to develop their skills in artistry and stand out in a crowded industry by taking intelligent, creative risks. I'm your host, Jonathan Ball. I hold a PhD in literature. I'm the author of numerous books, and I take a very analytical approach to art making, emphasizing both efficiency and experimentation. Please consider doing me a favor and pre-ordering my new book from Coach House Books, The National Gallery. It contains sonnets for Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, elegies in the manner of Rilke but for a dead iPhone, and other strange missives from yours truly, the Poet Laureate of Hell. So go to thenationalgallery.ca for more information. That's thenationalgallery.ca. Thanks. Today I'm just by myself, and I'd like to talk to you about my office, my offices, and offices in general, workplaces, workspaces, where you can need to go to work as a writer. You've got a lot of different options as a writer. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. Sometimes you're just sort of having to take a situation, a work situation, and make the most of it. Other times you have the opportunity to really kind of design and plan your work situation. By which I mean, the place where you're doing your work. So writers, have all sorts of different places that they can or will work. I just want to talk a bit about where I work now and other places I've worked in the past. I have a few sort of principles that I think are worthwhile keeping in mind when you're trying to work, you're trying to find a place to work, trying to maybe establish a place for you to work. Things to keep in mind, so I want to go through those, but first I want to just start with just talking a little bit about where I'm working now and what I'm sort of doing there and how I can manage to accomplish work. So it's a bit echoey in here today. Right now I'm in a studio downtown in the Exchange District of Winnipeg. So this is not home. This is a separate, outside studio. It's not my studio. This is the studio of Chasing Artwork / Justin Curry and GMB Kmichuk, who is also known as GMB Creative, I believe is his freelance work name. But GMB Kmichuk, the author, illustrator, Justin Curry, who's I guess primarily an illustrator, but also has some writing credits on some books that he's done, with Kmichuk in particular. Justin and Gregory have this great little studio space. I don't really. It's not my space, but I come in it fairly often. I kind of have an arrangement with them where I can come in. I come in like once or twice a week, depending on the week, and do some work here. And it's a nice way for me to get out of the house and get a lot of things done. There's things that I just have a hard time doing in the house right now because I have two very small children. One is 3, one is 4. Turning 5, and they are, they're kids, right? So they're always sort of underfoot, and they're always, wanting attention. I don't like to ignore them. It's a bad precedent, but also it's not really possible. Like if kids, the more you try to ignore kids, the more they want into your face. When they were really young, I remember when I was just home with them by myself. I remember I would try to time with a timer, can I lay on the couch for 5 minutes? Could they just leave me alone and play by themselves for 5 minutes? And I couldn't make 5 minutes. They would literally hit me with hammers. They would go get hammers, 2 hammers at each fiddle fist, and they started hitting me with hammers, saying, "Daddy, get up! Daddy, Daddy!" Smash, 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 hitting me with hammers. That's what it's like with kids who are really young. So I do, have a home office, and I do still work in that home office, but it's really not possible to work in it, unless they're asleep at night, so then it's late and I'm tired, or there, which I do, I do that. I do work in that office sometimes then. But even then, I don't want to wake them up. So I don't want to be making a bunch of noise in this office. It's on the same floor as them, so I tend not to work in it too much at home. Sometimes, my joke at home is that I have this very beautiful office, at home. As soon as you walk in the house, to the right of you is this, big open area where my desk is, and I've got these other desks sitting there, and on top of that, I have a giant picture window looking outside. Like, it's great. It gets all this natural light. It's this beautiful room with these nice modern glass desks, and everything's kind of set up there. I've got pictures of my book covers on the wall and everything. So it's a wonderful office, nice little office like I always dreamed of having when I was young. And, I was just sitting in a TV tray was my office, or the kitchen table was my office. I dreamed of having a nice separate room for the office where it wasn't, part of my bedroom, or it wasn't part of the kitchen or whatever. And I finally got it, and now I can't work in it half the time because the kids kicked me out of it, I was working in there the other day, and all of a sudden I had my headphones on and, trying to ignore the kids and do some work while, my wife had the kids. And all of a sudden I hear like, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy." And they're like yanking at my leg. And I'm like, "What?" And I look down and my daughter's just there, like, with like her, clothes in her hands, but she's not wearing her clothes. And I'm like, "What are you doing?" She's like, Daddy, I want to show you how I can put my shirt on." I'm like, "Okay, well, that's nice. But it's not, so I watched her put her shirt on and said, "Go, good job," and everything. But, that's great and everything. But it doesn't exactly help me meet my deadlines that day. You know what I mean? It doesn't help me turn in that, book review by 5 p.m. because there's just, too much going on in that area. So I still do primarily work at home, and I work in that office when the kids are sleeping, or when, I don't have to, I'm not, with the kids. I'm kind of primarily with the kids during the day usually. But one day a week at least, some evenings a week, and some days, I can actually leave, for the whole day or something, and go out, come to the studio. I at least, if not more than once, I at least come here usually one day a week, and then, I can have meetings during the day, and I don't have to live like a vampire, only, going out at night. So when the sun is down. So that's part of the reasons I have a kind of separate, space I go to. It's not really my office. It's, again, like I say, it's Justin and Gregory's studio. But I do, have a kind of arrangement where I can go there fairly regularly, and I get, some work done. I kind of treat it like an office for the day. I haul my stuff down, lay it on a table, do my work, and, pack it up, throw it in the corner, take off. So it's, so it's all out of their way, and then I can take off and do other things. Go back to my home studio life. So both of those sort of highlight this first principle, which is whenever you're trying to figure out where you're going to work, what your office is going to be, you really need to have some way that you can separate it from the rest of your life. At home, my office is, it's in a separate room. So that is sort of how I've separated it. I've separated it by putting it in a separate room. Unfortunately, when I wasn't thinking when I picked out which room I was going to put the office in. I kind of negotiated and finagled for this really nice, great, office in a beautiful large room. But I wasn't thinking and ahead to, when I was going to have these small kids. And I didn't realize at the time that I really needed a place with a door. That office doesn't have a door. And so it's a great office and everything, but there's no door. So it's not fully separated out from the rest of the house. And it is consequently, sometimes hard to work in it because the kids will come into it. The kids have some toys in it. I, don't like it that the kids have toys in it necessarily, in the sense of like, it's my workspace. I don't necessarily want to watch toys underfoot. But there's areas of the office where I don't really use them. So fine, kids can have toys in there and they can play in there when I'm not in the office and everything, right? I don't want to be like a draconic about it, and so I have some bleed between the house and the rest of the office, but it's a bad idea, frankly. I shouldn't have that. I should have a totally separate space that is completely disconnected from the rest of the house. But, this is my sort of, middle ground at home. What I do instead is I kind of have certain parts of the office that are separated out. So the whole room isn't separated, but there's parts of the office where it's like the kids know they're not allowed to do this. They're not allowed to do that. They're not allowed to touch these books. They're not allowed to touch that thing on the desk. There were kids, but for the most part, they do what they're told around it. All the drawers have clasps so that they can't be opened by the kids and things like that. But you really need a separate space. You need, because I kind of lost a part of the separateness of that office, I had to search out and find another place I could go sometimes, like here downtown in the studio. I can sometimes come here, treat it like an office for the day, or for a few hours. That is a really valuable thing because there's a total separateness from, the rest of my life in this, studio space. And if I ever, whenever they decide they're sick of me and throw me out of here, I'll go find another place, like the Writers Guild down the street has some space that they rent out. There's a lot of places that kind of rent space cheap where people can come and work. Or, you can sometimes make an arrangement with somebody who has a studio. If you have artist friends, you can maybe make an arrangement if you have a studio to maybe pay them a little bit and come into their studio or whatever. I think it's really important to have a studio space you can go to outside of your home office if you can manage it. I used to use university office for that, but I don't tend to have steady access to university office anymore because I'm not really an employee of the university. I work on the campus now and again. I teach classes from time to time. I have offices there often, but my office tends to move around, and it's not the kind of right now I don't have an office at UW, but I do have one at the U of Manitoba. So, but then next term I'll have one at the U of Winnipeg, but not the University of Manitoba. It's just too much change. I needed to find a place like this where I could at least, just come in a little bit, even if I'm not going to be here every day or something. Like if I was here more often, I guess I'd have to try to finagle my way in or buy my way into it. But, I just made a very kind of casual / formal arrangement with them. So whatever you do, though, you need to find a separate space. And you know what? Sometimes that separate space is a coffee shop, right? That's a very well-worn tactic that writers have used. I wrote my whole book, John Pace's Crime Wave, in a coffee shop. I spent I wrote that whole book in about a month to do the first full draft. I just went every day to a coffee shop and just sat there for hours and wrote the book. That's all I did. I had the movie on a laptop where I was also writing the book, and I was just watch the movie and write the book, watch the movie, write the book, watch the movie, write the book. That's basically all I was doing, that month or whatever. I just had managed to kind of arrange it. I mean, I spent more than a month writing that book. I had to do a lot of revisions, and I had to do a lot of rewriting and so on. But broadly speaking, it was about a month, 2 months of intensive work in coffee shops, and it worked really well. The coffee shop is nice because it is a separate place from you, separate from your home, separate from your kind of normal everyday life. Now, if you can make your home office a place that is sort of separate from the rest of the home and separate from the rest of your life, then that's ideal. for a lot of ways. But the problem too is like you have to then also maintain a separateness that people respect. If you have a family that you live with or roommates or kids, one of the problems is they don't necessarily respect the separateness of when you walk into the office. Like they don't necessarily get it that like you're working now, and yes, you could walk next door to the kitchen and do the dishes, but you don't want to because you're working. Somebody else can do that, or you can do it another time. They don't get that, right? Like people see you as being home. And so, especially young kids, like they see you as being home, and they don't understand that like you're home, but you're also sort of not there. You're trying to, do this thing. And it's, it's reasonable that they don't understand it, especially if they aren't writers or they don't have any sort of that kind of work. A lot of people don't have that kind of work. Like they have a job where, they clock in, they clock out, whether they're working at McDonald's or even working at a hospital, right? Like a nurse who goes to the hospital and then leaves the hospital, like she can only really be a nurse at the hospital, right? Like he can only be a nurse at the hospital. Those people leave and then they aren't doing that job anymore. It's not the same thing as writing, where you could still be doing it. Like one of the downsides of being a writer or being an artist of any type is that there isn't really off time in the same way. Like on time and off time is very flexible, and there's strengths to that. Like right now, one of the strengths of it is that I get to, because a lot of my work is flexible, I'm kind of, spending a lot of time home with the kids, where I may during the day, when they're not in school or whatever, when like maybe normally I would have to be at a job in my workplace. The downside of that is, I still got to put the same hours in most weeks. So, now I'm just kind of running ragged. But the strength, so there's flexibility strengths and there's flexibility downsides, right? One of the real downsides from a psychic point of view, a psychological, I should say, point of view, is that you don't really, it's hard to turn it off, It's hard to turn the writing thing off. And I try to turn it off, I try to turn it on and off because you can, and because I think it's healthy to to have times when you got it off and have times when, and to learn how to turn it on. But it's tricky, it's tricky to, and that separateness helps. If you can find any way to introduce separateness into your home office, whether it's another room, a door that closes, or whatever, or if you can go to another place like a studio or like a writing, even just like a closet, a shed out back, or whatever, a coffee shop, anything that has that separateness helps a lot. And bare minimum, you need some sort of transition. So even when I have not been able to maintain that separateness, and I've had to use a TV tray as my office or something, right? I was always trying very consciously to make sure that it was the same TV tray. It was the same place I sat at the kitchen table, or what have you. And barring that, barring some way of making the place separate, is, what I did, and what I encourage people to do is to build sort of transitioning rituals. So one of the things that I do now that really helps a lot, since I have a little bit of, the separateness has started to deteriorate a little bit at home. But even when I come out to the studio, again, it's not my studio, right? I'm sitting here in the studio by myself right now, but it's not my studio. Like Gregory and Justin are normally here, right? Like if they wanted to, they could walk right in the door and start doing whatever. And so that's great and everything, I like those guys and stuff, but what if you're trying to do something, someone else is doing something next to you? Well, is it distracting potentially, or whatever? how do you get into that work? If your kids come in the room and stuff, like how do you maintain or try it as much as possible to get into like work mode or work mood when there's maybe other people in the space, or it's just not a separated space like you maybe want or need in some way? Well, there's a lot of different things you can do. One simple thing is just some sort of transitioning object. So having some sort of object that you use or that you wear, and that like gives you a transition. I've heard of people doing this with like hats. They'll like put on a special hat or a special tie. You put on a tie and you walk into the office. Well, even though you're just at home, you've got a tie on and it's like work. You've done something special and different. Maybe you don't want to wear a tie because that maybe is ridiculous to you, but there's a lot of like things you can do. I like to use cups like as objects. So for a long time, I had a cup at home that my daughter Jessie, my older daughter Jessie, made for me when she was a kid, and I would put my coffee in that cup and I would drink the coffee, and that was how I was transitioning into office mode. So wherever I was, I would take that. If I was going to university, I would bring the cup with me sometimes, right? And like, if I was drinking from that cup, then I was at work. It was my special work cup that my daughter made for me. So it had like a nice sentimental value to it, but also it was different. It was a cup. I didn't use the cup normally in my life. I only used it when I was working. It's the cup I drank my coffee out of when I was working. So what happened was that cup broke because I would carry it everywhere. So I was like carried up the stairs, I carried it down the stairs. Anywhere I happened to be working, I'd have the cup. So finally it broke. I dropped it, carrying it around. So, me and Jessie, glued the cup back together, and, she painted it up nice with some kind of gold nail polish and things to make it look, pretty. And we were kind of restored it as best we could. But now it's toxic. I can't drink out of it anymore. So I use it as like a pen holder. And what I did instead was I got these 2 coffee cups from Vistaprint. I just went to Vistaprint. I don't know if that's .ca or I think it is. And I got my logo. I have a company logo because, I'm a company. I'll talk about this maybe in another podcast, but like writers are businesses, whether they know it or not, and whether they like it or not. And in some scenarios, it can be useful to get like a business number and so on and so forth. But in any case, I am also a company. My company name is Martian Embassy Media, and I have a logo for that, for Martian Embassy Media. I use it for things now and again. So if you were to buy my book, this book is otherwise provided to you as is. That book was published by Martian Embassy Media. So that book actually has the logo printed on it and so on. SM Biko made a nice logo for me. So anyway, I put that logo on 2 mugs, and I have one sitting in the studio here, and I have one sitting at home in the home office. So when I'm at work, I drink from those mugs. So it's a simple little thing, but right now I'm holding it in my hand. I look at this white cup with Martian Embassy Media logo on it, and I'm at work. I'm doing this podcast, talking to you. This podcast is published by Martian Embassy Media. It's not that it is a super formal thing, but it is a bit of a transition. I've got this cup in my hand, so therefore I'm working. I'm at the studio, so therefore I'm working, right? Like, it is a very psychically separated thing. Even if I was at home, just sitting downstairs, trying to be quiet and not wake the kids up, sitting on a couch with my laptop on my lap, away from any offices. Well, I would try to do that on the one couch, not the other one, because I try to use the one couch only when I do work. And I would have my mug. So I would be at work. It's a very stupid sounding thing, I know, but sometimes you need those triggers. They're basically psychological triggers. You're just training yourself to associate certain objects or certain rooms, certain environments and situations, and certain rituals with, being productive and getting work done. So I'm way more productive when I hold a mug in my hand. It sounds really stupid, but it's, there's a lot of real neuroscientific backing for something like that. I can see the logo, so if I'm not drinking from the cup, I turn it so the logo faces me. And then if, I find myself unfocused or distracted by something, I just try to bring myself back to the mug and remember that I'm at work. I need to get, I can't be checking Facebook right now because I'm at work. I've got this coffee in this mug still, so I must be at work. So anything that you want to do that gives you some sort of transition like that can be useful. And another way that I do that is when I write, I listen to the band Agalloch. So I put my headphones on and I listen to Agalloch. So there's a couple things involved in that. So one is putting headphones on. So when if I'm writing. So if I'm at home and I put my headphones on, the headphones means that I can't hear the kids, right? So all the noise they're making necessarily isn't bothering me. I also can't hear like my wife, right? I can't hear the phone. I can't hear other things. If my wife wants me, she has to come like physically get me or, text me, so that it beeps, if I've got my headphones hooked into my phone so that it interrupts my music or something. So if I'm here at the studio, sometimes, earlier today, me and Justin were both in here, and Justin was, grinding on some artwork, and I was, rushing to do a film treatment. So we both had our headphones on, listen to whatever we're listening to separately, ignoring each other completely, just working on our laptops. Or he's got a big computer set up, but I've got my laptop. So the headphones can help kind of, again, sort of separate you out, give you a bit of that separate space. But I go a step further, and when I'm writing, I only listen to Agalloch. So if I'm not writing, like I'm doing something else, I'll listen to other things. But if I'm writing, I'll try to only listen to this band, Agalloch, this crazy metal band from the States who is defunct now. But I have a long blog post about this, which I'll link to. If you're on the website, you can take a look at it. But I basically have sacrificed the band Agalloch, so I can't listen to them for fun anymore. I've trained myself, when I write, I don't make a bunch of different playlists. I don't, have any sort of fancy writing music or whatever, or, complex writing, ritual. All I do is I put my headphones on, I listen to the band Agalloch. I listen to the same songs in the same order. It's just a playlist that just has only this band's music on it, just thrown in there. And so it plays the same songs in the same order all the time. The first song has this very high-pitched kind of whining feedback squeal that it starts with. It's a very long, like melodic feedback squeal. So as soon as I hear that, I just start getting ideas and I start tuning everything out and I start writing. I've trained myself to just, associate the music of Agalloch with coming up with ideas and writing. So having that particular music playing in my headphones helps separate me out. It's also like heavy metal, right? So it's very loud. It kind of drowns everything else out. Distractions like are drowned out. When I am home by myself, I'll just blare it like as loud as I can, shaking the house loud. And so I can't hear anything else. I can't hear people outside. I can't hear the phone ring. If the bombs dropped next door, I wouldn't hear them. I can only hear Agalloch, but then I start to tune Agalloch out. So even that is sort of like gets tuned out. So I can't really listen to them for fun. I just have trained myself to tune them out immediately and just start writing. So anytime I don't feel inspired or I feel like I can't write, I just have to put Agalloch on, and then my brain is trained to just start writing, like a dog might, come to supper when you ring a bell. So you can do a similar thing, but maybe less extreme. You don't necessarily have to only listen to the band Agalloch or the same 3 songs every time on a loop or anything like that. But having an object like a tie or a shirt or some socks, or putting a certain mug that you only use in your office, you only use when you write, or you only use when you're doing work. That kind of thing goes a long way. And those transitions, by the way, are very important. That you only do things with that object or with those, you have to make it exclusive. So I can only drink from this mug when I'm doing work. Otherwise, it loses the aura of working. I know it sounds strange, but that's sort of how the brain works, right? That's the reasoning also behind having a separate office space. Just like if your bedroom on a separate level, your bedroom should only be used for sleeping and sex, right? You shouldn't have a TV in your bedroom because why? It'll affect your sleep. You will find it harder to sleep because you do other things in this bedroom. One of the great problems that high school students have is that they do everything in their bedroom, right? They do everything on their bed. They do their homework on their bed. They talk on the phone on their bed. They play games on their bed. They watch TV on their bed. And then they try to sleep in their bed, and they can't sleep. Well, it's not surprising for a couple of reasons. But one reason is that they've trained themselves to associate the bed with all these fun things you do when you're awake. And really, or stress even, you do your homework on your bed all day and now you're stressed out, then you try to go to sleep. Well, that environment is associated with the stress. So a lot of the times what you're doing in an office space is trying to think through those sorts of associations that you have with the environment, and you're trying to tailor them. You're trying to sort of be intentional about the associations you build with the environment. You want to be intentional about what's in that environment, how you transition and move into that environment, where that environment is, and so on. This kind of brings me to the last couple principles. So there's sort of 2 principles there. One is just having a separateness in terms of the environment, like trying to make it as separate as possible and trying to transition into the environment somehow. So I make a coffee in my mug, and then that's my transition into the environment. Or if I'm at the studio and I don't feel like making coffee, I'll just put some water in the mug, and that'll be my transition into the environment. And then when sometimes I don't even drink the coffee. I don't want it. I just make it as part of the transition into the environment, and I just let it sit there and get cold. And then when I'm done and I'm leaving, I dump any water or drink any water, whatever the case is. I dump out my cold coffee if I've got some in there. I wash the cup. So washing the cup, going into the other room or going over, to where the sink is and washing the cup. That's my sort of signal to myself that I'm transitioning out of being at work. At the studio, it's easy because you lock the door, you walk out the studio, you walk down the stairs and everything like that. At home, it's a little different, but again, I go to the next room, the kitchen, I wash the cup, I clean it up, I put it away, I dry it, I put it on the desk for tomorrow. Why do I transition out like that? Well, just like transitioning into the work space and the work environment and that whole work mentality, you want to try to transition out of it so that you don't bring that work stress or your mind racing all the time about work things into the rest of your life. It's hard, as I say, as a writer or as an artist, somebody who has basically trained themselves to be on all the time. You don't have those hard boundaries when you're kind of working on your novel, right? You could be doing it anytime, but you don't want to be doing it every time. You'll go crazy. You'll drive yourself mad and drive your family to drink because you just can't turn off. You won't be able to sleep because you can't turn off. If you're at all like that, you need to find transitions. You need to find ways to sort of transition and move out of the work mindset and work space. Sometimes an alarm will work for people. I like, as I say, to attach everything to this mug. Now, if I don't have the mug for some reason, I can still do some work. I don't need it, but it helps, right? It helps to just sort of imbue an object with a sort of aura like that, so that you can kind of, its proximity to you starts to help you compartmentalize that approach, that mental kind of, space. When you're actually setting up your environment, your office, however you're doing it, one of the most important things that is really underrated, and I don't hear people talking about much, so I like to talk about it a lot, maybe too much, is having what I call low friction. And what I mean by that is you want as little as possible between you not working and you working. So as soon as you get in the space, you should be able to work. So in an office, so at my home office, what I do is, as I say, I've got 3 desks. I've got one big glass desk where I've got my computer set up, right? And then I've got another 2 little glass desks on the side where there's printers and books and other things. And I just have some empty space over there too. And what I do every time whenever I'm done in the office, I try to clean the office up, right? That's also part of my leaving the office rituals. I try to just clean the whole office up. But sometimes I'm just too hurried to do that, I just don't have time. So when I don't have time, I just take everything off the glass desk and I dump it onto the other side desks. Why do I do that? Just so that the next time I come back to the main desk, it's clear and I can just start working. I don't have to clean it up. So maybe I actually have maybe I didn't clean the office. All the junk is just in a pile on the left. But I cleaned this main space so I can just come in and start working. It's low friction. You shouldn't have to just clean everything up and find things. My main desk, one thing I will leave on it, there's these little shelves that I kind of have this stack of 2 shelves that I put the laptop on top of, and I can use the laptop. I'm not going to get the ergonomics of how you should sit or how far your laptop screen should be and everything. But the nutshell of it is that you should be able to sit straight in your chair and look forward without tilting your head up or down and see the computer screen. So if you're sitting in your chair and you have to look down to see your computer screen, or you have to look up to see your computer screen, then something's wrong. You need to reformat that whole space. So I use a laptop, right? So a laptop almost always is down, right? Lower than you. So when sometimes right now I'm just using the laptop on a desk and it's not ideal because I'm at a studio. This is my studio that I can't set up exactly how I want, right? But at home, what I've done is I've got a riser that the laptop goes on. I don't use the laptop's keyboard. Instead, I use an external Bluetooth keyboard, and that way I can have my hands down and then, my eyes up, in a manner of speaking. So you can it's kind of outside of my purview to go through the mechanics of how you want to set your body up and your space up, but you want it to have some ergonomic validity, let's call it. You want to have thought through physically, can I be in this space for a long time? What do I need to do to make the space more comfortable for myself? Physically speaking, should I invest in a good chair, right? I would suggest doing that. Maybe maybe you're a person who wants to have a stand-up desk option. I kind of have my space set up so I can be sitting there, like I say, on this Bluetooth keyboard, sitting and looking at the computer screen. And then if I want, I can just stand up, and now I can use the laptop keyboard so now I'm in a standing position. It's not quite a standing desk, but it's sort of approximating without moving the computer at all. I'm approximating a stand-up desk or a sit-down desk, depending on how I want to work. I know other people who've done very complex systems to try to have both a standing desk and a sit-down desk, or they swear only by standing desks and so on. You need to investigate that kind of thing yourself, but ideally, you want a setup that doesn't hurt you, that won't kill you, right? You need some sort of system to work in that place with low friction. And low friction I define as as quickly as possible. There's as few steps as possible between you and doing some work. So again, I walk in with my cup in my hand. I put it down on the desk. I open the laptop. I turn it on. My laptop takes like 10, 20 seconds to turn on. So sometimes I'll just leave it on. A computer doesn't take very much more power off than on. Like a TV, if you have a TV turned off, plugged into the wall, it's using almost the same amount of power as if it was turned on. Laptops are a little different, but sometimes I'll just leave it on because I'm going to come back to it shortly. But most of the time I'll turn off because mine boots on pretty quick. Anytime my computer starts to not boot on fast enough, I'll sell it and get a new one, because I know from experience that for me, and maybe you're different, but for me, one of the greatest problems that I've had in the past is my computer takes too long to turn on. And so instead of turning it on, I'll go do something else. I'll look at it and think, it's going to take a minute to turn on, and then I'll go do something else. So, I don't have that problem anymore, but, whatever it is that is preventing you from doing work, you should really just pay attention to that. Pay attention to the times that you get a piece of paper and pay attention to every time you thought about doing some work or started doing work, and then, what stopped you. In fact, this is a really useful exercise for you to do next time you do work. So when you're done listening to this podcast, next time you go to do some writing, make a little list of all the things you do on the way to doing the writing. So what do you have to do? Do you have to go into another room? Do you have to go find another space? Do you have to get headphones? Do you have to turn your computer on? Do you have to go dig the file out of a folder? What do you have to do? Reduce the friction between those. Take as many steps as possible out of that. So I'll put all the files I'm working on my desktop, and I'll try to just only have the files I'm currently working on my desktop. So usually if you look at my computer, there'll be nothing on the desktop except for 2 files. 1 file, ideally. And that's just the thing I'm writing. I put the thing I'm writing on the desktop so I can open the laptop, turn it on, boom, it's right there. I open the file. I don't have to search for anything. I don't have to do anything else. I have my laptop set so that it is by default, the internet is off, because again, I don't want any distractions booting up. I don't want automatic alerts coming in while I'm trying to do some work, right? I've talked about this before with the focus form, which I'll link to, but you need to maybe just kind of figure out what's distracting you in the workspace and how can you prevent those distractions in the future. But the same thing is true for friction, on your way to doing work. What is preventing you from getting there? I've found in the past that for me, the computer being slow to turn on was a big issue. In the past, one thing I found was moving between offices was a problem. So I had a computer at the university for a while, and I also had a computer at home. I was using desktop computers then, and they would have different files in them, and I would have to get the file on a flash drive, and then sometimes I would have a problem with the drive, or the things would be all screwed up or whatever, or I would forget a file, and then I would be screwed because I didn't have the file. So then I tried to get Dropbox, so I could have this cloud kind of file sharing, but then I had to wait for the Dropboxes to sync. I had to wait for the files to update, and it was tons of problems. Then it was on the bus. I didn't have the internet or whatever, I was having so many problems. So finally what I did was I bought a laptop. And then I had the exact same situation at home and at an office. Everywhere I went, my laptop had all the same stuff that it had when I was somewhere else. So, connectivity issues maybe came into play. I was having a hard time on the bus. I wanted to do some work on the bus for a while. So I found some word processing programs where I could pull the files up on apps, right? And I got myself an unlimited data plan so that I could, I got a really cheap one, and they want to take it away from me. But anyway, I was very meticulous because I was very pressed for time. I was working a crazy amount of work. At one point, I was, I don't work quite this many hours anymore, but at one point I was working like 60 hours a week, running all over the city. I was running between 2 universities and also home. And then additionally, I'm doing stuff with my daughter and all this other stuff going on, right? So I was very stretched, very thin. I was very stressed out. I had to be as efficient as possible. And what I found was I just had to pay attention to where I was losing time. But more importantly than the time was I was just losing motivation. I would be like, it's not even that it took a long time for for me to find the file or to wait for the Dropbox to sync. It's just that I wouldn't do it because it was so demotivating to sit there and be like, ugh, this thing's got to sync to update. And I want to, even if I wasn't really as busy, I thought I was, or I felt I was, or I just felt frustrated by it. And so I would avoid it, right? I got frustrated, so I would avoid it. So what I would find myself doing is avoiding writing because I was frustrated about my writing setup, I was avoid work because I was frustrated about my workspace. If you've ever had a situation where your office is too messy so you don't go into it, right? You probably know what I'm talking about, right? And what happens when you finally do go into it and say, you know what, I'm going to clean this office up, right? It doesn't take that long, does it? You imagine that it's going to take you 10 years to clean this office. So I need a whole weekend to clean this office or whatever. And then really you can do it in an hour, usually. Or you can get it at least, pretty good in 30 minutes. But it just builds up so much in your mind and you just kind of feel like you're defeated before you start. And you don't want your office, your workspace to be like that. You want your workspace to be a place that you can walk into it, you can leave it, it has a separateness from your life. You can enjoy your time there, but then you can leave things behind there. And you can move on and not be worrying about work all the time. Because as much as you love your writing, if you're serious about this, if you want to really be a serious writer, whatever that means to you, if you want to take it seriously, and I think you should take it seriously, I think, whether you want to be full-time or part-time or whatever, you should take your art seriously. Even if you're a comedian, you should be taking your art seriously, there's a serious side to it. In fact, comedians are some of the most serious people you'll meet in terms usually of their work habits. You need to be serious about it. And the more you do it and the more kind of it becomes a normal part of your routine and your day, the better. But also, it is, it can become a grind, right? As much as you love writing, some days, you don't want to write, but you still often have to write those days, or you should at least. So make it easy on yourself, give yourself a space where you do it, even if that space is, a corner of your bedroom or in the laundry room or whatever. Stephen King used to write in a laundry room. Transition into it, get some minor little ritual or some little way to move into that space and create or emphasize the separateness that you have from the rest of your life. Transition out of it. And once you're in there, make it a low friction environment. Make it a place that is easy to do work in. If it's messy, try to confine the mess to a box in the corner, or just keep it clean. Try to have the stuff you need there, ready for you. Spend just a minute or a couple seconds, just putting stuff in order when you're done work so that it's ready for you the next day. And try to make it, of course, a low distraction environment. And what distracts you is going to depend on so many factors. A lot of people find the internet. I find the internet distracting, so I don't really go on the internet much at all. Again, I usually have my internet off. My office used to have a big bookshelf with all these wonderful books. I had all these books in my office, which is great, because I had all this work stuff. It was just very impressive, and it made me feel really cool to have all of these wonderful books and this big wall, filled with books in the office. But I had to get rid of them because I found them too distracting. I would start reading these books instead of doing writing. Or what was even worse was I'd be having a bad day as a writer, and I would turn my head and I would look at all these finished books, and I would think, oh my God, I'm so far from those people. I would turn my head and see like a Cormac McCarthy book, and I think, oh my God, I'll never be Cormac McCarthy. I'll never write a sentence as good as one of those sentences. And it would just become distracting and demoralizing. And, I found for myself, like, it was a very romantic idea to have, this office lined with books. But I found, like, in practice, it was really brutal. It just was, it didn't help me. As a writer, like I was better off just putting the books on another floor. I put them in the basement, and if I want a book, I can go down and get it. I've got a couple little books in my office on this little shelf. It's mostly reference books. I just try to take all that stuff out. Like I just needed to strip the office down so it was mostly just a place I got work done. At one point, I had my desk facing out the picture window, but I found I was looking out the picture window, so I turned it to face the wall. So, your mileage will vary. You'll have different things that distract you. You'll have different things that prevent you from starting. That's what I really mean by friction is, find all the things that are preventing you from starting and start to eliminate those things. Maybe it's feeling you have to have an office. Sometimes I find people, that's their thing. Like they feel like, oh, I really need a separate space. I really need to have a good, cool office setup. Now, I've finally got a nice, cool office setup, but you know what? I was more productive in the coffee shop, to be honest. Like, I've written in renovation conditions. I've written like at kitchen tables. I did a lot of writing at kitchen tables over the years. It's just, you just have to find a way to just designate an area and a space and a time as your work time. And it's easier said than done, but the more you can make it easy on yourself by engineering the environment a little bit, engineering your move in and out of that environment, and really constructing it or psychically associating it as this sort of space that you go in and out and that's separate, and removing friction, creating triggers, positive triggers that will help move you into the environment, eliminating the distractions. The more you can make it a place that is easy to go in and to start working, and possible to leave, is that's going to do very well for you. And again, really try to make it a place you can leave. I can't emphasize that enough. Like as the years go on, I find it more and more important to just like stop with the writing stuff sometimes, and just go do something else. So that's my advice. A few basic principles around, office space. Keep it separate, transition in and out, reduce the friction, prevent whatever's preventing you from starting or from enjoying getting into that space, and try to eliminate the distractions. And if you've got any great, tips or things that you've found work particularly well, please, let me know. Drop me a line. I'm always at jonathan@jonathanball.com, and keep writing the wrong way.